I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 83 of EO Radio Show. This is the 12th in a series of quick tip episodes focusing on the details of state registration of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. Other episodes have focused on the state filings in Nevada and Arizona, Washington State and Oregon, Alaska and Hawaii, New York and New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine and Vermont, Rhode Island and New Hampshire, Florida and Louisiana, and most recently North and South Carolina. And last month, that was even more recent, Kentucky and Tennessee. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Oklahoma and Texas. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there is a playlist just for the state filing requirement episodes. We'll work our way through the rest of the states in future episodes. It looks like we're just about halfway there. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world, because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. As we discussed in previous episodes, nonprofit corporations are one variety of fictitious business entities. Others include partnerships and limited liability companies. The laws of all the states prescribe certain formalities that organizers of these business entities must go through so that the entity can be regulated and subject to legal process as a person. Since business enterprises aren't natural persons, the laws have developed mechanisms for treating them like natural persons. And this is where the state filings come into play. In order for the organizers of these fictitious entities to take advantage of the protection of the laws, they have to provide notice as to the legal name, the state whose jurisdiction they are claiming for corporate organization laws, a physical address where they can be served with legal process, and certain other information. In this episode, like the others, we aren't going to dive deep into the pros and cons for where to incorporate a particular charity, but instead we're focusing on the ease of formation, standardized documents that are available, filing fees, and similar matters. As with all of the states we have discussed, if you do business as a nonprofit in Oklahoma or Texas, or solicit charitable contributions there, even if just through the nonprofit corporation's website, the nonprofit may need to have a legal presence and be registered in these two states. So for the details on these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella, and he specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular, charities that are tax exempt under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, he worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. Welcome back to the show, Joe.
Hey, it's good to be here again.
Going through that list, if this is our 12th, that means we've gotten through 24 states. Once we get through Oklahoma and Texas, we got one more. And then I think we're on the downhill side because we'll do Puerto Rico. And I think, did we do District of Columbia? But anyway, I think we got to get
District
through
of Columbia either. So those will be probably our trailers at the end. And unless we want to do like the U.S. Virgin Islands instead, that could be fun.
But we'll at least get to 52. So we're 12th episode. We got a ways to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, Joe, thank you for joining me again. I guess my point was we're halfway there, or almost halfway there. So let's start with Oklahoma. What's the document to form a nonprofit corporation in Oklahoma?
For sure. So the Secretary of State is what governs Oklahoma entity formations. It's what we've seen as the most common entity there in the state. For a domestic they call them not-for-profit, not nonprofits in Oklahoma. So the domestic not-for-profit corporation is a 2-page form certificate of incorporation. It is a little bit different than some we've seen in our reviews. It starts with a checkbox where the corporation will be for general public benefit under the Oklahoma General Corporation Act, and they give specifically Title 18, Section 1202. This is a good reminder to review all the state laws when you're working within a state, because you want to make sure that you're falling under exactly what they do. Everybody has their own little quirks. After that, attestation then has some of our basics, the name you're going to use, your registered agent, their street address. Section 3 notes that if the not-for-profit is a church, then it does ask for a street address of the church. Interestingly, only churches fall under the street address provision. Other not-for-profits do not need to identify their street address. Section 5 is a fill-in for the nature of your business/purpose. Oklahoma notes this can be as simple as, quote, to engage in any lawful act or activity for which corporations may be organized under the general corporation law of Oklahoma, unquote. It's really the only place on the form where you could really discuss your 501c3 language that we say that we always require in our things, just to make sure that the IRS gets you to the filing. Section 8 notes a minimum of one director must be named, and Section 9 asks for a mailing address for each of those directors. So you do have it there, even if you're not giving the address of the foundation, your nonprofit. Specifically, you will be giving addresses for your directors. Then the next section 10 is where your incorporator must be named, and actually here they ask for a minimum of 3 incorporators with their mailing addresses. I know this seems like a lot, and I went back over in our surveys, and Alaska had this same requirement as well, that you needed to have 3 incorporators, not just 1. So keep that in mind. Obviously, you could double down with your directors or your officers there, as you've got people that are already going to be part of your nonprofit, but still think about that on that side. Unlike other states we've seen, Oklahoma also has specific forms available for both amendments and for restated certificates of incorporation once you've been formed, which is nice. Yeah, no, it's good. Lastly, one section I did skip there. Section 11 asks for an email for their primary contact of the business. They do want to have an email address attached to someone. That's kind of unusual. Again, we would recommend probably an officer of the company that's going to be there fairly regularly to be that email contact.
Okay, so how about the foreign corporation that's qualifying to do business? How do we go about that in Oklahoma?
Oklahoma has a generic certificate of qualification foreign corporation form, and it's for both nonprofits, not-for-profits, and foreign profits. We've seen this before in a couple of other states. It's also a 2-page form, starts with that same checkbox, whether the corporation will be for general public benefit or not. The rest is the standard name, mailing address, registered agent and their address, business purpose, email primary contact. Section 8, though, asks for a statement of the assets and liabilities not earlier than 6 months prior to the filing of the qualification. I went through the Oklahoma codes and through the Secretary of State's website to see, how their directions on the filing, and it did not see that this was that the not-for-profit was exempt from this statement. So it seems opportune that you would need to have some idea of your financials going into register. Again, this is for the foreign registration with the idea that you're already in business in that sense, so that you would have an idea of your financials. So it's not necessarily something you wouldn't have, but it is something unusual to see in the actual registration. Then Section 9 is, again, because we talked about this being for both profit and not-for-profit. Section 9 is your actual checkbox where you say that you are not-for-profit. And as with all the states we've discussed, a good standing certificate from your home state must be attached to this filing. Both these filings can be done online. Oklahoma has an online fill-in form that can be submitted in lieu of filling it out and sending it in, or the forms can be printed out and submitted.
All right. So it's an interesting combination of some kind of old features, that is having 3 incorporators signing, and yet it's modern in the sense that it can all be done online, and they recognize email addresses. So that's kind of interesting to me. So what's the cost? Is there a difference between filing online and filing by paper?
Well, there's not a difference for filing online versus paper, but there is a very marked difference between domestic and the foreign. So the domestic certificate of incorporation is only $25, but it's $300 for the foreign certificate of qualification. Again, this, I think, ties to the fact that it's for both not-for-profit and profit, and they don't delineate in the costs, where we've seen that in some states as well. So you're really paying as a foreign not-for-profit the same as you would as a foreign for-profit corporation.
Yeah, that's pretty steep. You'd have to raise a lot of funds in Oklahoma to make that worthwhile.
Yes.
So what does it look like for turnaround time?
For the Oklahoma website, normal processing time for the online is same day. They don't note how long it will be for a paper filing to take, but online research notes that it's between 7 to 10 business days right now. And they do not offer an expedite on the mailing ones, or it's, again, if they have a same day, not for the website either.
Is there an annual Secretary of State filing due then once you're incorporated or you've done your foreign qualification?
So at current, the Oklahoma Secretary of State does not require an annual statement from not-for-profits that once they've filed for registration. It's a one-time registration. that's kind of nice. And again, as a foreign, that will offset over a couple of years, that will offset the cost of your initial registration.
So what about transparency, or the flip side of that, privacy concerns for the individuals involved in the Oklahoma filing?
So as we know, the domestic filing requires the names and addresses of the directors and the incorporators. And then the same also in the foreign, it asked for addresses of the directors that are signing. But that's really, again, since there's no annual report to follow up, these are going to really be your only transparency issues. And again, it asks for a mailing address. It doesn't have to be a home address in that sense. It can be a P.O. box.
Or the office address.
Or the office address, that is correct.
Okay, well, that's not so bad. So any other state agencies in Oklahoma that are not-for-profit needs to be aware of?
Interesting here, in Oklahoma, the not-for-profit is organized there. It's a foreign corporation soliciting, holding assets, or doing business in Oklahoma. It's actually just an additional registration with the Secretary of State. It's not through the Attorney General's office, which we often see in other states. Here, the Secretary of State has a specific charitable organization division, and then you file a registration there, and then you have an annual renewal there. In one sense, this takes the place of the more standard annual report, as all documents are filed then and shown up on the state's website. And again, this registration rule can all be done online with the Secretary of State. Additionally, if you're looking to get state tax exemptions in Oklahoma, the not-for-profit will need to apply with the Oklahoma Tax Commission. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes, both sides of the Oklahoma Secretary of State and their tax commission, as well as to the specific forms. So you can look through those as you feel the need to think about Oklahoma.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Thanks for running all those down. I'm sure that'll be helpful. So let's turn our attention to their neighbor to the south, Texas, and what is needed to file for profit organization that wants to set up as a Texas corporation. How do we go about doing that?
So Texas also, their Secretary of State also governs the formations. They have a Form 202, which was the domestic certificate of formation for a nonprofit corporation. It's a 3-page form, covers again the basics of name, address, your registered agent in the state. Some of the more specifics there. Article 3 notes specifically that, quote, management is vested in the board of directors, unquote, and then asks for their names and addresses. They have a minimum of 3. And again, this can be those street or mailing addresses. There's no need to worry about home addresses. Article 4 is a checkbox for members or no members. We've talked about this in a couple of other states prior. It's unusual, but it can be there. Article 5 is their purpose. It's not only does it have a section for more generic purpose, it has an additional box for, quote, any additional language or provisions that may be needed to obtain tax-exempt status. So in other words, our IRS concern language has a little box. You can pop it right in here. It also asks for the name and address of the organizer, and then it has a larger checkbox section to note the effectiveness of filing beyond simply now or within 90 days. It also allows for an event to cause the filing. It's kind of an interesting that I'd never seen before. It was like if you were merging into something, it would be effective once the merger was complete. Here's the new entity. So it was kind of an interesting, different thought again. So there's some, as always, quirks in a state. And then for this one, for this Form 202, the organizer must be the one that signs it, not an officer. So it's not too uncomfortable. Like I said, it's got some nice 501c3 places for your language, so that's good.
Good reminder to go find the exact language you need.
Yes, for sure. For a foreign nonprofit, they have a Form 302, which is an application for registration for a nonprofit corporation. It's also a 3-page form, same basics, name, address, purpose, registered agent. Section 5 here asks for the fiscal year's close month, which isn't something we've necessarily seen in our initial registrations. That's something more we see when we register the charity with the Attorney General's offices in states. But here they're asking for it there. They also have a checkbox for nonprofit corporation or cooperative association. They ask for a difference there. Article 3 already asks for the EIN to be identified. So again, because you've already formed somewhere else, it's not an unusual request here to have that in place already. Then Articles 11 and 12 ask for officers and directors with their names and addresses, again, street or mailing address. Same as with the domestic. When you get to the Article 13 in this, it's a member, no member checkbox. And then they have space for supplemental provisions here as well beyond what you want to put in. Here, the same thing too, the effectiveness of filing checkboxes there. Here, because it's already formed, an officer or a director, and it only needs to be one, can sign off on this. So you should be fine there.
So I just want to throw in one thought for listeners here. Since we talked in this episode several times about members, directors, and officers, those are three distinct roles under most state nonprofit corporation laws. And we've got an earlier episode that talks about the general distinction between those categories, because a member in modern nonprofit corporation formations, we usually try to steer away from having members because it adds a whole layer of complexity. Just want to make a mental note there for any listeners that are contemplating forming a new Texas corporation or really anywhere. If you're wondering whether you should have members, who, what it means to be a director and what it means to be an officer, I'll put a link in the show notes to the episode that talks a little bit about those distinctions. So that's a little bit of a digression, or as we sometimes call that, a field trip. So back to you, Joe, with the actual mechanics of filing the foreign nonprofit qualification and the incorporation certificate. What are Texas options? Is there e-filing or all on paper or both?
So Texas offers the option of e-filing through their SOS Direct website. That's one word. Again, there'll be a link in the show notes for that. Note that you will need to set up the account and submit your payment type, such as a credit card, before you can even start the filing. I will note here, Texas has fees attached to all of the services through their Secretary of State. So, for instance, like here in California and Delaware, you can do a business entity search or a name search. There's already a $1 fee for each search that you undertake with the state. So as soon as you, like I said, you've got to log in, make sure your credit card is current, and then you can do the search. And then you'll get your response. From my experience, it's usually 24 to 48 hours afterwards that you'll get an actual invoice for that $1 fee that you've done the search. And if you then form something, you found the search and the name isn't there, and you do it in the same time frame where you file your articles, then it will waive that $1 into your fees. And then the filing fee for both the domestic and the foreign nonprofits is $25. So that part's not too expensive.
All right. That's great. Privacy, transparency in Texas. There's a little bit of disclosure, but not a ton.
Not a lot, no. As we noted, both the 202 identifies the directors, and the foreign Form 302 has the officers and the directors both.
For the foreign entity, the officers and directors are probably already public anyway on your 990. So not a big deal there. What's the turnaround time? What does that look like in Texas?
Per the Texas website, online filing should be rapid, but last time I formed one, which was late January, early February, they were taking 10 to 12 business days, even with the expedite. The expedite is an additional $25. It's not available online, and it took us almost 2 weeks to get our filing back. So, and when we talk to our registered agent, they always caution us that Texas is kind of slow to get copies back to you.
What about annual reports? What do we do in Texas to keep ourselves current?
Annual reports are kind of interesting in Texas. Under Section 22.357 of the Texas Business Organizations Code, Secretary of State may require a nonprofit corporation to file a report not more often than once every 4 years. The Secretary of State will send a notice to the nonprofit at its registered agent office as to the time the report is due. Failure to file the report when requested to do so will result in immediate involuntary termination of the corporation. So best advice is watch your mail and see what comes in and make sure that you answer it timely. And again, it will go to your agent too. So make sure that we don't talk a lot about having a registered agent in the States, but make sure it's a agent you feel comfortable with. If it's someone that's an individual, and make sure that they're on it. Again, we often use professional services for that are across the country, and they know that there's timeliness to these, so they will turn them around to you within 24 hours of getting them. But be aware, you won't have necessarily, it's not every year. It's not February 15th every year. It's not, the day I formed it every year. It's at the state's discretion once every 4 years. So watch your mail.
It sounds like a paper mail address, not an email address.
That is correct. I did not see where they were sending it to an email as well.
And if you've changed that paper mail address, you better let them know.
That's why it's tied to your agent, not to your mailing address. So in theory, your agent, if you're using a registered agent service, they don't move very often. And when they do, they will pick up the paperwork for you. But yes, if you have an individual doing it, definitely be on the lookout for that. And that's something that, yes, we haven't talked about this side in a while, but we always caution you to have to update regularly when you change your officers, when you change your directors, even if it's out of the time when your normal filings are due. In Texas, obviously, be very aware if you're changing your registered agent to make sure that if they've changed their address, to make sure that gets filed in a timely manner so you're getting your paperwork.
Yeah. Well, that's a really different quirk for Texas that we haven't seen before. And so aside from its quirkiness, is there a cost with this if they get around to asking you to update your annual report?
If you're asked, when you're asked, it's only $5.
Go figure.
Yes.
So moving on, some things you just can't figure out the why, right? What other state agencies are there in Texas that a charity would need to be aware of and file with?
Under Texas law, most charities, nonprofit organizations are not required to register with the states. This is very unusual compared to what we've seen. Registration is required with their Office of the Attorney General, however, for certain law enforcement-related organizations that solicit by telephone, public safety organizations, veterans organizations, and their solicitors. The Texas Law Enforcement Telephone Solicitation Act is what regulates these organizations for the solicitations. And they're really the only ones that need to file. They need to file an annual statement with the Attorney General and pay a $50 fee. However, the Texas Attorney General does maintain copies of IRS 990 PFs. So this is for the returns of private foundations or Section 4947A1 non-exempt trusts, charitable trusts treated as private foundations. They need to furnish copies of the IRS of those 990 PFs to the Attorney General at the time they filed them with the IRS on their website. And you'll see this in the show notes. They have an email address for receipt of those. And again, this is limited to 990 PFs. 990 for public charity or 990 EZ or 990 T do not need to be submitted. So again, Texas has some very small specifics that they're looking at there.
Yeah, that's super interesting because all of those forms, the 990 PF, it's public information anyway. So they could collect it themselves, but I guess they don't really know who's from the Secretary of State filing. They won't know whether you're a private foundation or not. So anyway, that's an important note to people operating in Texas that their 990 PFs are supposed to be with the AG's office. Good to know. State tax exemption. I know there's no income tax in Texas, but there are other taxes.
Yeah, they do have a sales tax, and the Texas Comptroller handles all their tax exemptions, and they have a very specific page designated for qualified organization exemptions. So there's a link for that. It's actually, in terms of what we looked at in Texas, it's actually one of the, by far the most interesting and most robust links that you'll find in the show notes from Texas, where they talk about this with the taxing stuff. So it's good if you're going to be there and you're looking for tax exemptions, by all means, go to that link and read what they have for you.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you running down all these details. It's been another interesting conversation, and we'll do it again sometime. On to our next one. Thank you so much. So that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the resources in Oklahoma and Texas that we talked about and the earlier episodes on the other states and that member director officer episode that I mentioned. Also, as I noted in the beginning, Farella, Braun and Martell has a YouTube channel, and the importance of that is that there are several nonprofit playlists, including the one we're building with all the state filing episodes. So that's all in one place, and you can take a look in the show notes for a link to the YouTube channel, and that will help you to find other episodes that are of interest to you. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun and Martell. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.